I'm Alex Harper, just moved to Willow Creek, a small suburb in Oregon, hoping to enjoy a peaceful life after years of hustle. I imagined I'd get to know the neighbors, figure out trash pickup days, or learn the unspoken rules of the neighborhood. But I never expected that from the very first minute. I'd end up in the crosshairs of Melissa Grant, a self-appointed HOA queen, who seems to think she controls the universe. It all started faster than I thought. On my first day, while I was still unpacking, a note stuck to my door startled me. Your lawn isn't mowed, not up to Willow Creek standards. I looked at the yard, grass barely an inch tall, and wondered who had the time to notice this. The next morning, another note appeared, trash bin 2 inches off the curb, fix it immediately. I started thinking I'd accidentally moved into some quirky comedy movie. Then Melissa showed up. Just a few days later, she stood at my door, clipboard in hand, glaring at me like I'd just burned down the neighbor's house. Your porch light is too bright, she declared, her tone commanding. It's bothering people. Tone it down. I stood there dumbfounded, forcing a smile and promising to adjust it, though in my head I just wanted to ask, who stays up late staring at my light? From then on I knew Melissa wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She had a personal vendetta against me, though I had no clue why. Did she hate newbies who didn't bow to her self-proclaimed authority, or did she just love stirring trouble? Whatever it was, I'd unwittingly become her target. After a few days of Melissa's notes harassing me, I decided I had to face reality. She wasn't going to leave me alone. I was still busy unpacking, searching for my coffee maker amid the chaos, when the doorbell rang obnoxiously. I opened the door, and there stood Melissa Grant, clipboard in hand like a general gearing up for battle. I'm Melissa, HOA president of Willow Creek, she announced, her voice stiff like she was reading a script. I've been watching you since you moved in, and clearly you don't understand how we operate here. I blinked, trying to stay calm. Hi Melissa, I said, forcing an awkward smile. I'm trying to settle in. Is there a problem? She smirked, flipped her clipboard, and pointed to a scribbled line. You've broken 3 rules in your first week, she said, her tone accusing me like I'd stolen the neighbor's silverware. Unmowed lawn, misaligned trash bin, and a porch light bright as a spotlight. You need to fix this now, or I'll report it to the HOA. I wanted to burst out laughing, but Melissa's piercing stare made me hold back. All right, I replied, I'll take care of it. Thanks for the heads up. She nodded, as if she'd just done me a favor, then turned away, leaving me standing there wondering if I should buy a ruler to align my trash bin. But deep down, I felt annoyed. This wasn't a friendly reminder, it was a warning, and Melissa clearly wanted to establish she ruled Willow Creek. The next day, I met Tom Rivera, an older neighbor a few houses down. Tom had the look of a retired soldier, silver hair, broad shoulders, and a warm, gravelly voice. When I told him about Melissa's notes, he chuckled, slapping my shoulder. You haven't seen anything yet, he said. Melissa once fined me $50 because my dog, a Labrador sweet as butter, wasn't on the HOA's approved breed list. She even posted notices around the neighborhood to shame me. I frowned, seriously, over that. Tom nodded, sipping coffee from his beat-up mug. She rules this place like a queen, he went on. Lydia Bennett, the single mom down the street, got hounded too. She left kids' toys in her yard once, and Melissa threatened a $100 fine, saying it ruined the community aesthetic. Lydia had to apologize to get off the hook. Hearing Tom, I started piecing together a clearer picture of Melissa. She wasn't just a busybody, she was a tyrant, wielding HOA power to bully everyone. I pictured her sitting at home, making an enemies list to punish, and somehow I'd shot to the top of it in just days. Why doesn't anyone fight back? I asked Tom. He shrugged. Most don't want the hassle. Melissa has a way of making things personal. I nodded, but inside I resolved not to let her turn me into her next victim. Back home, I stared at the pile of notes on my kitchen table and told myself, all right Melissa, if you want a game, I'll play. After that face-to-face with Melissa, I thought she'd ease up and let me breathe. But I was wrong, dead wrong. Hours after she left, I found a new note taped to my garage door. Your lawn still isn't up to standard, needs even trimming. I looked at the yard, grass still short from yesterday's trim, but apparently not perfect enough for Melissa's mysterious standards. I shook my head, muttering, She must carry a grass ruler in her pocket. The next day, as I dragged my trash bin to the curb, this time using a ruler to be sure, another note appeared. Trash bin still off, even by half an inch. This is your final warning before a fine. I stood there, staring at the perfectly aligned bin like a good student, wondering if Melissa had hidden cameras tracking me. I started imagining her in her house, binoculars in hand, logging my every crime like an amateur detective in a cheap comedy. But Melissa didn't stop there. By Wednesday night, as I sat watching TV with a bowl of popcorn, the doorbell rang again. I opened it, and there she was, this time with a graver expression than before. "Your porch light," she said, pointing at the bulb I'd already dimmed per her demand. "It's still too glaring. I got complaints from neighbors." I frowned. "Which neighbors?" She crossed her arms, smirking. "That's not your concern, just turn it off, or I'll report it to the HOA. I wanted to ask if she'd written the complaint herself and forged a signature, but I just nodded, shut the door, and dimmed it again, now so faint I nearly tripped on my steps. The breaking point came Friday morning. I was sipping coffee when I spotted another note slipped under my door. "Bird noise from the nest in your yard is too loud, violating Willow Creek's noise pollution rules." I nearly spat out my coffee. Bird noise. I stepped outside, eyeing the little nest in my oak tree, where a few sparrows chirped. It was a natural sound anyone would find pleasant, but to Melissa, it was a crime. I stood there, hands on hips, wondering if she'd find the squirrels next for scampering too fast. I decided to see Tom Rivera again, to check if this was normal for Willow Creek. When I told him about the bird noise, he burst out laughing, spilling coffee on his shirt. "You serious?" he said, wiping tears. "Melissa once sent me a letter because my wind chimes were too loud in a storm. She's a complaint machine that never stops." I nodded, but inside, I was getting fed up. "She's targeting me more than others," I said. Tom shrugged. "Maybe you're fresh meat, and she wants to flex her power." After a week of Melissa hounding me with notes and absurd complaints, I started feeling like I was in some bizarre survival game. Each time I cleared a challenge, she'd throw a new one at me. By now, I'd mowed my lawn shorter than a golf course, aligned my trash bin to the millimeter, and dimmed my porch light so much I needed my phone to see the path. But the bird chirping thing really pushed me into self-reflection mode. What am I doing with my life? I mumbled, staring at the nest like it was Melissa's accomplice. Sitting in my kitchen with the pile of notes before me, I decided I needed to dig deeper into Willow Creek and myself here. I wasn't just some new guy enduring Melissa. I'm a real estate investor, though lately I'd paid little attention to my portfolio. The thought sparked, wait, I've owned a few houses around here for years. I stood, rummaged through drawers for my laptop, and opened property files I'd ignored for 5 years. Here's the deal. Back in 2019, I sank money into Oregon properties after a local bank auctioned foreclosures. Willow Creek was one, a small neighborhood with cheap homes and solid rental potential. I bought a batch of 4 through a management company, letting them handle rentals and send me monthly checks. I didn't sweat the details, just cared about steady cash. But now, with Melissa turning my life into hell, I wondered if something in those files could shed light on her, or give me an edge. I opened old emails from the management company, scanning the property list, and there it was, 124 Maple Lane, Willow Creek, Melissa Grant's address. I blinked, double-checking. No mistake. The house Melissa lived in, where she no doubt penned her crazy notes, was mine. I laughed out loud, the sound echoing in my quiet kitchen. "She's my tenant?" I muttered, hardly believing the coincidence. I dug deeper, requesting Melissa's lease from the company. Within an hour, the PDF hit my inbox. I skimmed it. Melissa Grant, signed a lease 3 years ago, pays $1,200 monthly. But the juicy part wasn't just that she lived in my house, she'd breached the contract. I found a note from the management, late on rent 2 months in 2021, reminded. Then another, installed Willow Creek HOA's sign in front yard without approval, violating no alteration clause. I laughed harder, picturing Melissa thinking she ruled the neighborhood, oblivious I could evict her any time. I sat back, cold coffee in hand, and thought, this wasn't just a funny twist, it was a weapon. Melissa was trying to make my life a nightmare, but she didn't know I controlled what she called her castle. I could send an eviction notice right now, but I paused. No, I told myself, I need to play this smarter. After discovering I'm Melissa Grant's landlord, I felt like I'd struck gold to escape her mess. I didn't strike yet, curious how far she'd push her petty complaints. But Melissa didn't keep me waiting. Days later, a note slid into my mailbox. Emergency community meeting at Willow Creek Hall, Saturday 6 p.m. No details, but I knew it was about me, probably another fine for bird noise, or my porch light. I smirked, deciding to see what she'd pull. That night, I walked into the hall, a small room with mismatched plastic chairs and the faint smell of stale coffee. About 24 neighbors sat scattered, some whispering, others looking dragged there. Melissa stood up front, in a gray blazer, holding a mic like she was opening the Olympics. I took a seat in the back near Tom Rivera, who sipped coffee from his trusty mug. "You're about to be the star," Tom whispered, winking. I grinned, bracing for the show. Melissa started with a fake sweet tone. "Thanks for coming tonight," she said, flashing a stiff smile. "We're here about a serious issue threatening Willow Creek." She paused, scanning the room, then pointed at me like a courtroom lawyer. "Alex Harper, the newcomer, is ruining our community." Everyone turned to stare, some murmuring, others wide-eyed. I crossed my arms, staying cool, but inside, I was heating up. This wasn't a nudge, it was a public attack. She went on, her voice rising like a stage actor. "He doesn't mow his lawn to standard. Look at it, a wild field. Trash bins misaligned, porch lights blinding like a flood lamp, and I've had reports of noisy birds from his yard." I nearly snorted at noisy birds again, but Melissa's dagger-like glare stopped me. She waved a paper, likely my crimes list, and declared, "These aren't minor violations. This is disrespect to Willow Creek's values. He doesn't belong here, and we need to act." Melissa landed her punch. "I propose a $200 fine and immediate corrections. If not, we'll consider stronger measures." A few clapped weakly, but I saw Tom shake his head, muttering, "She's overreached." An old lady in the corner whispered to her neighbor, "I like the birds, what's the big deal?" I smirked, realizing not everyone bought Melissa's act. She wanted me as public enemy number one, but it wasn't a unanimous win. After the meeting, as people shuffled out, Lydia Bennett pulled me aside. She clutched her purse, eyes nervous. "I have to tell you," she whispered. "Melissa doesn't just target you, she fined me $100 once because my kid left a bike in the yard. Said it ruined the community. I had to apologize to get her off my back." I frowned. "Why not push back?" Lydia sighed. "I was scared she'd escalate. She's got power here, or makes people think she does." I nodded, feeling Melissa's tyranny clearer. This wasn't just my fight. She was the neighborhood's nightmare. Hearing Lydia, I decided I'd had enough of bending. Back home, I reopened Melissa's lease on my laptop. She wanted a public showdown? Fine. I could evict her any time with her violations, harassment, property changes, and that arrogance. "You want me as your enemy, Melissa?" I muttered, flipping through papers. "Let's see who wins." I didn't know she'd pull a crazier eviction stunt later, but that night, I was ready to strike back. With her house secret in hand, I wasn't just the new guy taking her jabs, I was the one in charge. After that HOA meeting where Melissa made me Willow Creek's public enemy, I thought she'd hit peak insanity. But I was wrong big time. Tuesday morning, as I brewed coffee and savored a rare quiet moment, I heard my mailbox clank. I stepped outside, expecting a bill or junk mail, but instead found a thick envelope stamped with the HOA logo, looking serious as a court summons. I frowned, opened it, and nearly dropped my mug. "Eviction notice," the bold text screamed. I blinked, reread it, thinking I'd misread. But no. It said, "To Mr. Alex Harper, after thorough review, the Willow Creek Board determines your property fails to meet our community's aesthetic and value standards. Due to repeated violations and ongoing disputes, we have initiated a request for your removal from the premises. You have 30 days to vacate, or face legal action." Signed below was Melissa Grant, her signature florid, like she'd just penned a masterpiece. I stood there in the front yard and laughed. A dry, short laugh at the absurdity of the situation. I own my house, the paperwork's clear, paid off the bank 2 years ago. The HOA has no power to evict me. That's basic law in Oregon, or anywhere in the US. But then I read the last line, non-compliance may lead to property forfeiture proceedings. My laughter died. Forfeiture. This wasn't a joke anymore. This was a real threat. I'd heard of overreaching HOAs, using fines and vague rules to financially pressure homeowners, sometimes pushing them to lose their homes. Melissa couldn't directly kick me out, but she could make my life hell through legal harassment. I brought the envelope inside, sat at the kitchen table, and read every line carefully. The list of violations was there: lawn, trash bin, porch light, bird noise, all the things I'd tried fixing at her demands. But there was a new one: window paint not in compliance with HOA color regulations. I frowned, got up to check. My windows were still the original white, from when I bought the place, never repainted. Melissa was clearly making stuff up to beef up her case. I shook my head, wondering if she'd hired someone to Photoshop pictures of my house as evidence. Anger started bubbling up, but I held it back, returning to my laptop and pulling up Melissa's lease. If she wanted to play big, I wouldn't sit still. I knew I could flip this. She was living in my house, and she'd breached enough terms for me to kick her out right now. But I paused, thinking. No, I muttered. I'll let her dig deeper. She thinks she's in charge, but she doesn't know she's on thin ice. I smirked, picturing Melissa sitting in her house, my house, writing that notice with a smug look. She thought I'd panic, pack up, and leave in 30 days. But I'm not the type to give up easy. I was sick of her petty complaints, and now, with this eviction notice, she'd crossed the final line. I grabbed my phone, snapped photos of the envelope and letter, and texted them to Tom Rivera with a message: she just shot herself in the foot. Tom replied instantly, "What's your plan?" I grinned, typing back, "Just watching her self-destruct is enough," but in my head I was already strategizing. Melissa wanted a public war? Fine. I'd show her I wasn't just some new guy taking her notes. Melissa's eviction notice sat on my kitchen table like an official declaration of war. I was still reeling from her audacity, threatening to seize my house over grass, trash, and birds. But the anger soon gave way to something else: excitement. I'd known her house secret before, but now, with this insane letter in hand, I felt like I'd been handed a razor-sharp sword. I couldn't just defend myself, I could strike back, and Melissa would never see it coming. I sat down, opened my laptop, and brought up Melissa's lease on the screen. Reading it line by line, I couldn't believe the perfect irony. 124 Maple Lane, Willow Creek, the house Melissa lived in, where she no doubt wrote that eviction notice to send me, was my property. I'd owned it for 5 years, bought it from the bank, and Melissa was my tenant, signed through a property management company. I laughed out loud, the sound bouncing around my quiet house. "She thinks she's the HOA queen," I muttered, "but she's just my tenant." I dug deeper into the lease, and the more I read, the surer I felt of my win. Melissa hadn't breached just one term, but several. First, she'd been late on rent for 2 months in 2021. The management company noted it clearly, though she paid up after pressure. Second, she'd put up that Willow Creek HOA sign in the front yard without permission. Clause 4B banned property alterations without landlord consent. And now, with this eviction notice, she was trying to meddle with my ownership rights, a violation bigger than the rest. I smirked, imagining her smugly drafting her letter, clueless she was burying herself. I picked up her eviction notice, rereading the "You have 30 days to vacate" line. How ironic, I whispered, because I could send her the same thing right now. Under Oregon law, I could terminate her lease with cause, and Melissa had given me a laundry list of reasons. I opened my email, found a lease termination template from the management company, and started thinking. I could send it today, demand she leave in 30 days, and watch her squirm when she realized I was her landlord. But then I paused, hand hovering over the keyboard. No rush, I told myself. Melissa clearly thought she held the power: the public HOA meeting, this eviction letter, all to flex on me in front of the neighborhood. If I hit her now, she'd freak out, but I wanted more. I wanted her to self-destruct, to push this game to the edge, then I'd drop the final blow when she least expected it. I sipped my cold coffee, feeling a rush of adrenaline. This wasn't about enduring her notes anymore. It was a battle, and I was ready to win. I texted Tom Rivera. She just sent me an eviction letter. But I've got a secret. I own her house. Tom shot back. What? You kidding? I sent him a photo of the lease, and he replied, holy crap, this is gold, what's your move? I grinned, typing, waiting for her to crash and burn first. Tom sent a big laugh emoji, and I knew he was hyped for the moment too. I sat there, staring at the papers on the table, Melissa's letter next to her lease. Her arrogance was unreal. She thought she could boot me from my own house, not knowing I could do the same to her anytime. But I wouldn't rush. I wanted her to keep strutting forward, confident, so when I dropped this bomb, she'd have nowhere to run. After realizing Melissa was my tenant, and her eviction notice was a legal farce, I decided it was time to strike back. I'd planned to let her dig deeper, but that forfeiture threat was the last straw. I didn't just want to defend myself, I wanted her to taste defeat on her own turf. Sitting at my laptop, I opened the termination template from the property management company, and started drafting. Every word I typed carried a glee I couldn't hide. My notice was short, clear, and sharp as a blade. Dear Miss Melissa Grant, per the lease agreement for 124 Maple Lane, I, Alex Harper, as the property owner, hereby terminate your tenancy due to multiple violations, including harassing other residents, unauthorized property alterations, and interfering with lawful ownership rights. You have 30 days to vacate the premises from the date of this notice. Failure to comply will result in legal action. I added my digital signature, printed a copy, and smirked. Done, I muttered, picturing Melissa's face when she read it. But mailing it felt too tame. I wanted to see her reaction live. I decided to hand-deliver it to her house, 124 Maple Lane, the place I owned that she still thought was her castle. I stepped outside into the cool afternoon, envelope in hand like a warrior heading to battle. When I got there, Melissa was in her yard, pruning shears in hand, probably looking for more excuses to nag someone about their bushes. She turned, eyeing me with her usual haughty glare. What are you doing here? She snapped, sounding like she was shooing a stray dog. I've got something for you, I said, handing her the envelope. She frowned, snatched it, and tore it open right there. I crossed my arms, waiting for the golden moment. Melissa skimmed it, then her eyes widened, lips tightening. What is this? She barked, her voice shaky. Lease termination notice, I said calmly, fighting a grin. You've got 30 days to move out, Melissa. I'm your landlord, and I'm done with your games. She froze, the paper trembling in her hands like a leaf in the wind. This is a joke, right? She stammered. You can't do this. I smirked, stepping closer. Oh, I can. You breached the lease harassing me, putting up that HOA sign without permission, and now trying to evict me from my own house. I've got every right under Oregon law. Funny, isn't it? You sent me an eviction notice, not knowing I could do the same to you any time. Melissa's face flushed red, her eyes blazing like she wanted to devour me. You're making this up, she yelled. I'll sue you for retaliation. I chuckled, shaking my head. Go ahead. I've got the lease, the deed, and all your notes proving you've harassed me. The courts will love this story. She opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out. For the first time I saw Melissa speechless, and it felt amazing. I turned away, leaving her standing there with the paper, her mind probably racing for a comeback. Back home, I texted Tom, just gave Melissa the termination notice. She nearly fainted when I told her I'm her landlord. Tom shot back, brilliant. How'd she take it? I typed, like a fish out of water. But she won't give up easy. And I was right, Melissa wasn't the type to surrender without a fight, but I was ready. She wanted war, I'd give her a battle she'd never forget. With this secret, I held the upper hand, and now it was time to see how she'd squirm when she realized her power was gone. After handing Melissa the lease termination notice, and watching her crumble in her own yard, I thought I'd get a few days of peace to savor this small victory. But I forgot one thing, Melissa wasn't the type to lose without thrashing. Just 24 hours later, I got an email from Willow Creek HOA compliance team with the subject, Violation, Unlawful Eviction Notice. I opened it, and right away recognized Melissa's smug tone, even masked in formal language. Dear Mr. Harper, it began, we have been informed that you have undertaken an illegal eviction action against a resident of our community. The HOA has strict regulations against retaliatory actions and unauthorized resident displacement. Any attempt to remove a Willow Creek member without proper process will result in immediate fines and further legal action. This is your official warning. Sincerely, HOA Compliance Team. I laughed out loud, shaking my head at Melissa's nerve. Did she really think she could use the HOA to shield herself when I was her landlord? I sipped my coffee, then drafted a reply, keeping it professional but with a hint of sarcasm I couldn't resist. Dear HOA Compliance Team, I wrote, thank you for your message. However, Melissa Grant is my tenant at 124 Maple Lane, a property I legally own. I have the right to terminate her lease under Oregon landlord-tenant law due to multiple violations, including harassment and unauthorized property changes. This decision is outside the HOA's jurisdiction. Furthermore, any attempt by the HOA to interfere in a lawful landlord-tenant matter could be considered harassment, and I'm prepared to take legal action if necessary. Sincerely, Alex Harper, Melissa's favorite landlord. I hit send, smirking, knowing Melissa would flip when she read it. But she didn't stop at the email. That afternoon, as I was mowing my lawn, this time with a ruler to be sure, 2 cops showed up at my door. I shut off the mower, wiped my sweat, and walked over. Hi, Mr. Harper, one officer said, his tone flat. We got a complaint that you're trying to illegally evict someone and using intimidation tactics. I sighed, already guessing the culprit. Let me guess, I said. Melissa Grant called you, right? The 2 officers exchanged a look, then nodded. She says you threatened her yesterday, the other one said. I gave a dry laugh, inviting them inside. Come in, sit down, I've got something to show you. I grabbed my laptop, opened Melissa's lease, the termination notice I'd sent, and the stack of her complaint notes proving she'd harassed me since I moved in. I handed over the eviction notice she'd sent me, pointing out that I own my house and the HOA has no authority to do that. The officers read through it, flipping pages, then one sighed. Looks legal, he muttered to his partner. She's not being illegally evicted, she's a tenant breaching her lease. The other nodded, looking at me. Sorry to bother you. This happens more often than you'd think. Some people don't get that HOAs don't trump property rights. I shrugged. No worries, I'm used to her crazy by now. They left, but as they did, I overheard one knocking on Melissa's door. Miss Grant, he said sternly. Don't call us again, unless it's a real emergency. This is a civil matter. I smirked, picturing Melissa's face right then. Melissa had tried turning the law against me, first the HOA, then the cops, but both backfired spectacularly. I knew she wouldn't stop, but each pushback weakened her more. I sat down, texting Tom. She called the cops on me, but they sided with me. Tom replied, she out of moves yet. I typed, not yet, but she's losing. With every misstep Melissa made, I edged closer to ending her reign in Willow Creek. When Melissa flopped with the HOA email, and the cop call to my house, I, Alex Harper, thought she'd take a break to rethink her strategy. But I underestimated her stubbornness. Saturday morning, as I sipped coffee and enjoyed a peaceful weekend, I heard a shrill yell outside. I pulled the curtain, and the sight nearly made me drop my mug. Melissa stood in front of my house, holding a homemade sign reading Save Willow Creek from Alex, flanked by 3 people, probably allies, she'd roped in, holding signs saying stop unfair evictions. I blinked, wondering if I'd stumbled into a bad sitcom episode. I stepped onto the porch, arms crossed, eyeing this tiny protest. Melissa wore her usual gray blazer, hair tied tight, clutching a cheap handheld megaphone, looking like she was trying to play serious in a terrible skit. Alex Harper is ruining our neighborhood, she shouted through the megaphone, her voice crackling like it was about to die. He's evicting innocent residents, threatening Willow Creek's values. We have to stop him. Her 3 backups, a scrawny old man, a middle-aged woman clutching her purse, and a guy who looked dragged into it, mumbled along, stop evictions. I smirked, unable to believe she thought this would work. Tom Rivera came out from next door, coffee mug in hand, chuckling. See this? He said, pointing at the tiny crowd. She's calling it a revolution. I shook my head. 3 people make a revolution? Tom shrugged. It's all she could muster after that HOA meeting. No one buys her act anymore. I glanced back at Melissa, watching her try to grab the attention of a few passers-by, but they just glanced and sped up like dodging a multi-level marketer. Then Lydia Bennett appeared from down the street, pushing her son's bike. She stopped near me, whispering. She called me yesterday, told me to join to protect the community. I said no, and she threatened to fine me over this bike, again. I frowned. She ever get tired? Lydia sighed. She's been panicking since you sent that termination notice. She knows she's losing. I nodded, realizing this protest was Melissa's last-ditch effort to salvage some dignity after I'd exposed her at the meeting and the cops shut her down. Melissa turned to me, megaphone screeching as she yelled, "Alex Harper, you can't evict me. I'm the soul of Willow Creek. You'll pay." I stood on the porch chuckling. "Melissa, you've got 30 days to move. 2 weeks left now. This is my house, and you breached the lease. Save your energy." Her face flushed. She spun back to her protesters, but they looked less enthusiastic by the second. The scrawny old man whispered something to the middle-aged woman, then both quietly slipped away, leaving Melissa with the sleepy guy. She tried shouting a few more lines, but her voice broke. "We won't let him win," she hollered, but no one cheered. A few neighbors poked heads out windows, not to support, but to watch the spectacle. One yelled from afar, "Just move out already, Melissa." I nearly laughed, and Tom slapped my shoulder. "See, she's made herself a clown." The protest fizzled in under 15 minutes. The last guy wandered off, muttering about needing sleep, leaving Melissa alone with her sign. She glared at me, eyes full of fury, then stormed back to her house. My house shoulders slumped. I went inside, texting Tom and Lydia. Her protest flopped. No one cared. Tom replied, "Faster than I thought." Lydia texted, "Good, she's out of moves." I sank onto the couch, sipped my coffee, and reflected. Melissa had tried rallying the neighborhood against me, but instead of winning, she'd turned herself into a joke. After the public meeting and now this failed protest, the neighbors weren't scared of her anymore. Melissa's pathetic protest flop made it clear she was losing her grip on Willow Creek. Tom's laughter rang beside me as the last sleepy guy ditched, leaving Melissa alone with her crackling megaphone and rickety sign. "She's done," Tom said, slapping my shoulder. "No one's afraid of her now." I nodded, but inside I knew Melissa wouldn't go quietly. She was too proud to accept defeat without one last swing, and I was right. The next day, I started prepping for the official eviction date. The termination notice I'd given Melissa stated she had 30 days to leave 124 Maple Lane, and now only 2 weeks remained. I didn't want this dragging on, so I contacted the property management company to confirm the legal process. They advised filing with the local court for an official eviction order, a necessary step if Melissa refused to leave voluntarily. I drafted the paperwork, listing her violations, harassing me installing the HOA sign without permission, and that fake eviction notice she sent me. I submitted it, and the court quickly approved, setting the eviction date for Friday, 2 weeks out. Meanwhile, Melissa didn't sit still. I got an email from her, not the HOA, but her personal address. "Harper, you'll regret humiliating me in front of the neighborhood. I filed a harassment complaint against you. Withdraw your notice now, or I'll make you lose everything." I laughed, forwarded it to the management company to add to the file. If she thought an empty threat would rattle me, she clearly didn't know me. I texted Tom. She just emailed, threatening to sue me for harassment. Tom replied, "She's out of tricks. The court'll laugh at her." But the surprise came Thursday night, a week before eviction day. The doorbell rang and I opened it to find Derek Grant, Melissa's husband, standing there, hands in pockets, looking like a guy forced into something he didn't want. "Hey Alex," he said softly. "Can we talk?" I frowned, invited him in. Derek sat on the couch, sighing. "I'm sorry for Melissa," he started. "She's lost it since you sent that notice. She got fired a few years back, and the HOA's the only thing making her feel important. She can't handle being evicted." I crossed my arms, listening. "I get it," I said, "but she's done too much. She sent me an eviction letter for my own house, called the cops, staged a protest." I can't let it slide. Derek nodded, eyes on the floor. I know, I just wanted to ask for leniency, maybe more time. She promises to stop, drop all complaints. I smirked. She say that, or are you speaking for her? Derek went quiet, and I had my answer. Derek, I said firmly, I feel for you, but Melissa chose this path. She had 30 days, now a week left. If she wants to negotiate, she needs to come here herself. He nodded glumly, stood. Thanks for hearing me out, he said, then left. I shut the door, sighing. Part of me felt bad for Derek, stuck in Melissa's crossfire, but I couldn't let pity blur my resolve. I returned to the kitchen table, checked the court papers, and called the local sheriff to confirm they'd assist on eviction day. They agreed to send 2 officers Friday morning with the court order. I texted Lydia. She sent her husband to beg mercy, but I'm not budging. Lydia replied, good. She doesn't deserve it. I nodded at the screen knowing I had backing from folks like Lydia and Tom. Eviction day finally arrived, Friday, the day I'd waited for since sending Melissa that termination notice. I woke early, brewed strong coffee, and stood by the window, eyeing 124 Maple Lane. No signs of her leaving, no suitcases, no moving truck, just eerie silence. I smirked, telling myself, she's not going quietly. But I was ready. The court had approved the eviction order, and the sheriff promised deputies by 9 a.m. This fight was ending, and I'd be the one standing. At 9 sharp, a patrol car rolled into Willow Creek, parking in front of Melissa's house. 2 deputies stepped out, one with a clipboard, the other knocking on her door. I stood a few yards away on my sidewalk, arms crossed, watching. Tom Rivera joined me, coffee mug in hand as usual. What'll she do? He asked, voice curious. Scream or smash something probably, I said. She's not the quiet surrender type. Tom chuckled. I brought coffee, enjoy the show. Melissa's door swung open, and she stepped out in her familiar gray blazer, hair tied high, but her eyes weren't haughty anymore, a mix of anger and panic. What are you doing here? She asked, voice shrill. The deputy with the clipboard answered, tone flat. Miss Grant, we've got a court order to evict you from 124 Maple Lane. You've got 15 minutes to leave, or we'll have to remove you. Anything left behind goes to the locksmith and cleanup crew. Melissa's face flushed, hands gripping the door frame. This is my house, she screamed. You can't do this. The deputy didn't flinch. No, Miss Grant, this is Mr. Harper's house, he said, pointing at me. You were notified 30 days ago. You're trespassing on private property. Leave or we'll arrest you. Melissa spun toward me, eyes blazing like she'd burn me alive. You, she shrieked, pointing. You can't do this. I'll sue you. I'll ruin you. I shrugged, chuckling. Go ahead, Melissa. But today you're out. No negotiating. She stormed back inside, and I thought she'd pack and go. But then a loud crash came from within. I frowned, glancing at Tom. What was that? He asked. Before I could answer, a picture frame flew out the window, shattering on the lawn. Miss Grant, stop, a deputy yelled, rushing in. Melissa's screams echoed, I won't let him win. Then another smash. This time a chair kicked across the floor. I stood there, stunned. She's lost it, Tom muttered, but his eyes gleamed like he was watching an action flick. The deputies dragged Melissa out, her arms flailing, hair a mess. Let me go, she wailed. This is unfair. The deputy holding her snapped. You're damaging property. Calm down, or we'll cuff you. Melissa stopped thrashing, but her eyes still shot daggers at me. You didn't have to do this, she hissed through clenched teeth. I'd drop all complaints. We could have talked. I crossed my arms, shaking my head. Too late, Melissa. You sent me an eviction letter, called the cops, protested my house. You picked this road. She went silent, her face paling as she realized there was no way out. The deputy released her, motioning for her to grab her things. Melissa stepped back into the house one last time, dragging a small suitcase, muttering something I couldn't hear. 15 minutes later, she emerged, pulling the suitcase across the yard, giving me one final hate-filled glare. You'll regret this, she whispered, but her voice lacked strength. She got in her car, slammed the gas, and vanished from Willow Creek with the screech of tires on pavement. The deputies changed the locks on the house, handing me the new keys. "It's done," one said. "If she comes back, call us." I nodded, thanked them, and stood looking at the now empty house. Tom slapped my shoulder. "Hell of a finale," he said, laughing loud. I smirked. She did this to herself. Lydia appeared from a distance, giving a thumbs up. "Thank you," she shouted. The neighborhood's quieter now. I went back inside, sank onto the couch, and let out a breath. Melissa was gone, leaving behind a mess, literal and figurative. But I didn't care. I'd won, not just because I was right, but because she'd driven herself to ruin. Eviction day was the climax of all the drama, and now, I just wanted to enjoy the peace I deserved. As Melissa was finally forced out of 124 Maple Lane by the deputies, amid screams and crashing furniture, I stood on my porch, watching her car disappear down Willow Creek's road. The squeal of tires felt like a final goodbye, and then, silence returned. A silence I didn't expect to feel so sweet. I took the new house keys from the deputy's hand, smirked, and thought, it's over at last. Melissa's gone, and I'm still here. The next day I started fixing up 124 Maple Lane. The deputies had left the place a wreck. Broken picture frames, flipped chairs, and a coffee table kicked off kilter. I hired a cleanup crew to sweep away Melissa's mess, then called painters to refresh the walls. I wasn't planning to live there. It's a rental property, and I wanted it ready for a new tenant, hopefully someone less unhinged than Melissa. When the painters left, I stood in the yard, looking at the clean, empty house, feeling relieved. "Goodbye, HOA Queen," I muttered, chuckling. Tom Rivera stopped by that afternoon, carrying an extra coffee from his place. "Look at you," he said, pointing at the house. "Real landlord now. She leave anything fun?" I laughed hard. "Just smashed frames and a pile of rage. It's all gone now." Tom nodded, sipping his coffee. "Thanks, Alex. You don't know how much lighter this neighborhood feels. No more notes, no more fines over nonsense." I shrugged. I just wanted peace. She turned it into a war. Lydia Bennett swung by later, pushing her son's bike as usual. She stopped, smiling brightly. The first smile I'd seen from her without a trace of worry. "Alex," she said, "I can't believe she's really gone. I've left toys in the yard all week, and no one's knocked to threaten a fine." I grinned. "Good for you. Now you can park that bike anywhere." Lydia nodded, eyes gleaming. "Thank you. The whole neighborhood owes you one." I waved it off. Just doing what I had to, but not everything wrapped up neatly right away. Monday morning, I got an email from the HOA. "Dear Mr. Harper, due to the recent departure of a board member, we have an open seat. As a valued Willow Creek resident, we invite you to run for the board." I read it, laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. They wanted me to replace Melissa. After all she'd done to me in the HOA's name? I texted Tom. "HOA asked me to join the board. Can you believe it?" Tom shot back, "Don't do it. They just want someone to blame when stuff goes sideways." I nodded at the screen, deleted the email without replying. I had no interest in that mess. Over the next few days, I noticed Willow Creek truly changing. No more notes on doors, no one banging to gripe about trash bins or porch lights. One afternoon, I saw the old neighbor's wind chimes jingling without fear of a fine, and Lydia's son's bike sprawled across her yard, carefree. I walked the neighborhood, feeling the calm I'd hoped for when I moved here for the first time. Melissa had ruled this place with fear, but now she was gone. People were living easier. I sat on my porch one evening, sipping a beer and staring at the stars. Tom strolled by, waving. "How's it going, landlord?" he called. "Peaceful yet." I raised my beer. "More than I hoped." He grinned, kept walking, and I sat there, thinking it over. Melissa had tried making my life hell, but she'd failed, and I'd turned her nightmare into reality. Willow Creek was quieter than ever now. With Melissa gone, no more complaint notes, no tense HOA meetings, no one at my door with a clipboard and a smug glare. I sat on my porch one cool evening, beer in hand, watching the stars twinkle over Oregon's sky. A soft breeze rustled the oak in my yard. the one Melissa once griped about for its birds, now just a gentle sound I loved. I smirked, thinking about the wild ride, and realized I'd learned more than just how to align a trash bin. Looking back, I never expected life in Willow Creek to turn into a war. When I moved here, I just wanted a quiet spot to unwind after stressful real estate days. But Melissa Grant made that dream a dramatic comedy I didn't sign up for. From her first notes about my lawn and porch light to that insane eviction notice she sent me, I got dragged into a fight I didn't ask for. But in that chaos, I found a big lesson: legal rights are power, and knowing them can flip you from victim to victor. The secret about owning Melissa's house was a twist even I didn't see coming at first. When I found out she was my tenant, I realized I didn't have to take her harassment. I could hit back. The lease, the deed, and Oregon law gave me an edge Melissa never had. She thought she was the HOA queen, but she was just a breaching tenant, and I used that to turn the tables. I sipped my beer, chuckling at the memory of her shocked face when I handed her the termination notice. That was the moment I knew I'd won. But winning wasn't just about kicking Melissa out. It was about reclaiming peace for Willow Creek, not just for me, but for Tom, Lydia, and everyone else she'd bullied. Tom's wind chimes weren't fined anymore. Lydia left bikes in the yard fearless, and I mowed my lawn my way, no ruler needed. Melissa had ruled with fear, but once she left, people lived freer. I wasn't a hero, just a guy who wanted calm, but I was proud to end her reign. I also learned not everyone deserves a deal. When Derek begged mercy for Melissa, I considered it, but saw she'd never change. She sent me an eviction letter, called cops, staged a protest, and only pleaded when cornered. If I'd gone soft, she'd have harassed me again the first chance she got. I smirked, thinking, no, Melissa, you picked this path. Sometimes you've got to stand firm to protect what's yours. Now I keep up my real estate investing, but I'm warrior of HOA neighborhoods. Willow Creek was a pricey lesson, not in cash, but in time and energy spent battling Melissa. I still own 124 Maple Lane, rented it to a young family, and they're perfect tenants. Pay on time, no complaints, no dumb signs in the yard. I texted Tom last week. New tenants are great. No drama, he replied. Better than Melissa's all that matters. I stood, went inside, set the empty beer bottle on the kitchen counter. Looking around my little house, no notes on the door, no one banging to yell, I felt content. The Melissa drama was a nightmare, but it taught me to stand tall, use knowledge to shield myself, and savor victory without bragging. I turned off the lights, hit the bed, and slept better than ever, knowing Willow Creek was finally home, mine, not Melissa's. Thanks for the lesson, Melissa, I whispered in the dark, chuckling. But don't come back. The tale of Alex Harper and Melissa Grant in Willow Creek mirrors a familiar reality in the U.S. today, the tension between individual rights and community authority, especially in HOA neighborhoods. In America, HOAs are set up to maintain living standards, but sometimes they become tools for people like Melissa, those who abuse power to impose personal whims. Modern U.S. life, with the rise of suburbs like Willow Creek, shows this clash isn't rare, from petty rules about mowing or trash bins to overreaches like eviction threats. Alex's story is a textbook case of how Americans face excessive control from seemingly harmless groups. The lessons from this tale are practical and fit life in the U.S. now. First, knowing your legal rights is crucial. Alex only beat Melissa because he knew he owned her house and understood Oregon tenant law. In real life, this reminds us to read contracts, check deeds, and dig into laws when threatened. Second, don't let emotions override reason. Alex weighed Derek's plea but didn't budge, seeing Melissa wouldn't change. A smart call in an America where kindness can be exploited. Finally, community unity is strength. Support from Tom and Lydia helped Alex push through, suggesting that in U.S. neighborhoods, bonding with neighbors can be key to handling real-life Melissas. Stay prepared, stand firm, find allies. That's how to survive and win in today's American dramas. If you enjoyed the Alex and Melissa drama in Willow Creek, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more hilarious neighborhood battles. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video. where we'll uncover more unexpected secrets,